Spatial Dimension, Principles, Process and Praxis, and will be chaired by Architect Professor Harsha Munasinghe.
You can see, right? So, my presentation is a global culture and local heritage, historic urban landscape approach as Praxis. Ladies and gentlemen, this is based on research that I've been doing for a while, and you might be wondering what's the meaning of this title altogether. Global culture and local heritage. We know now the culture is getting globalized. Culture is everywhere. Culture runs across the geographical boundaries, whereas the societies are fixed within the geographical boundaries. That's where the heritage becomes local and the culture becomes global. So, during this presentation, I'll try to talk to you about the concept of heritage, how it evolves, and what sort of a role it has in heritage and society, right? And then how this so-called modernism, the modernity, how it actually has had an impact on urban heritage particularly. Because I'm going to actually focus on urban heritage, the cities, when they become heritage cities, what happens. And then I will introduce you to the new approach that the UNESCO has now promoted, historic urban landscape approach. And then I will show you how the value-based conservation actually has become the important thing today. Earlier we were talking about object-based conservation. We were conserving objects, cities, buildings, some objects. Whereas today we are talking about many other things, mostly value-based. I'll conclude at the end how this particular approach actually has been able to bring a new life for historic cities. We got just by birth, but what we learned as a result of being a member of a society, that is culture. A certain value system. What's heritage? Something we inherited. Something we got actually, right? There are various kinds of heritages. Maybe the properties, maybe some important items that you inherited. But most of these things are actually like personal heritages. When I was preparing these slides, I was thinking about what kind of personal heritages I can take as examples. And the first thing that came to my mind was my ring, right? And it has certain value. It has a market value because it is made of gold. It did have had a small piece of precious stone, I think it was emerald or something like that. It fell sometimes back. Still the ring is valuable because my marriage is still holding, right? Though the stone fell. Anyway, so somehow it is important for me. It reminds me certain things. But it is not a cultural heritage. It has nothing to do with the culture. It has nothing to do with anything else, right? But when you talk about some other things that are culturally important, there you go, actually the cultural heritage. Entire corpus of material science, either artistic or symbolic. That is how UNESCO defines cultural heritage. And that is the fact that whatever you talk about, that is where it is. And then of course the Venice Charter talks about the things that are imbued with a message from the past. So there we are. So what are the values actually we are talking about? Various kinds of values. What is a value? Value is actually a characteristic, actually related to heritage. Various kinds of values. As I said, market value, economic values, cultural values, historic values, various kinds of values we talk. But we can quite interestingly divide these values into three categories called inherent values, intrinsic values, and extrinsic values. These are the three important categories of values that we do have. So when we talk about World Heritage Cities, when we talk about various other things, you find all these kinds of values together. Where are we focusing? What are the more important things? This is what we really need to understand, and this is what we really need to evaluate and assess at the end of the day. So this is a diagram that I developed some times back. It's trying to understand what is heritage. Heritage can be first broadly divided into two pieces as physical heritage and non-physical heritage. Physical heritage, if you take a little longer, you can divide that into cultural heritage and natural heritage. And we are thinking about cultural heritage, movable as well as immovable heritage. So I have given some examples for movable and immovable heritage, and these do have, most importantly, tangible values as well as intangible values. But if we really look at any of these tangible items, take a building, take some other product, anything, they are actually results of intangible practices, right? There is nothing else. So where should we actually focus? These intangible practices rather than the tangible objects. That's why I said we need to move away from the object-based design to value-based design. I've been looking for various directions for that. Why do we protect the heritage? You ask somebody, why do we need to protect the heritage? They said we can actually show it to the tourists. I consider that as a secondary thing. I consider that as what we call a windfall gain, right? Nothing else. You can actually you can empower a society by doing that, because you will strengthen the identity of the place because the heritage represents the society that has lived over the years, and by empowering the society, society represents the location. You always identify yourself with a place, isn't it? I'm from this particular place, I'm from this particular country, I'm from this particular continent, wherever, region, whatever, right? You always identify actually part and parcel of that location. So as a whole, what we do is actually to endorse what we call a genius loci, the spirit of the place. What's the spirit of the place? How are we going to actually endorse that? How are we going to strengthen that by protecting the heritage, right? So we talk about modernity, we talk about globalization, we talk about so many other things. So what is urban heritage? Many people think about cities, many people think about city centers, many people think about so many things. To me, how I look at urban heritage is actually, it is a heritage in urban scale. The scale is the more important part. That is where we have that so-called intangible quality of the heritage. That is where we can actually protect it as such. Any city, any tangible heritage, particularly a city, would become a monument or a heritage for being a setting or a settlement for a society.